we're staying with solutions and strategies, let us get an overview of Africa's approach, of Africa's PropTech market, a look at innovation and digital strategies from real estate firms on the continent, as well as the growth of PropTech startups and funding in Africa. And to present this, please help me welcome to the stage Dolapo Omidire, founder of Estate Intel.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Okay, just holding on. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, lovely. So my name is Dolapo. I'm the founder of Estate Intel. We are a data company, and we provide intelligence and market research to people who work within the African real estate space. Today, I'm just going to be walking us through what is going on in the African PropTech space, talking about fundraising, the key players, how the market is changing, and what corporates and founders or other startups should be doing at the moment. So like I said, I'll walk us through the PropTech story, key market players, how you can apply PropTech and what you should be doing, and I'll give a brief overview about Estate Intel as well, and then we can take a few questions. So to start off with, last year, or this year rather, so far we've seen about $3.7 billion raised in African funding in total. So this isn't just PropTech, this is all the sectors, including FinTech, Health Tech, Agric, all the sectors. Right now we're about $3.7 billion. But if we look at what's happening in the PropTech space specifically, it's quite small. This is less than 1%, about just much less than 1%. We have $5.2 million. Now, the amount of money raised is not an indicator of how successful the PropTech industry is, but it's just an indicator of scale. So we can use it to sort of understand the amount of interest and the amount of actual activity that's going on. So right now we're seeing that we just have over $5 million, which is less than 1% of all the funding raised year to date. Even though that is still small, what we're still seeing is that 2022 was a standout year. If we look at the average fund raised over the past 3 years in sub-Saharan Africa, we're seeing that was probably just over $1.4, $1.5 million. But this year, we're seeing that that activity has grown 5x. So the interest in the PropTech space is definitely blowing up this year. We're seeing some raises. Estate Intel, actually, we announced a raise this month that we closed earlier in the year for $500,000. Small, another Nigerian PropTech startup, which raised about $1 million in Q1. We have Nawi, which is a North African startup, actually, announced their $5 million raise earlier in the year in February. Split as well, which is just about to announce their $2.6 million raise, which was closed in Q2 as well. And we also have LiveVent, who raised $450,000 in Q2. So this year, even though the PropTech space is quite small, if we're looking from a scale and a size perspective, this year, 2022, so far, is very, very standout. The interesting thing is the players, though. What we've seen is that Nigeria is one of the biggest accounts for the biggest volume and the biggest number of startups in the PropTech space. That's from a count perspective. But I think when we start looking at things like revenue, we start looking at things like amount of capital raised, and even customers, we see that other players in Egypt and South Africa are doing a bit better. Right now, we're tracking up to 225 startups in the space. However, one of the interesting things is many of them do die, actually. So we have 225 startups here, but quite a few of them in a couple months, they're either going to go dud or they're not going to continue operating. And I think that one goes to the fact that there's not much capital available for them to test their ideas, fail, iterate, and improve, as you see with other sectors like FinTech, especially FinTech. The number of countries we see this activity happening is just about 18, which is less than half. But if you look at the demographics of Africa, I think there are about 11 countries that account for 70% of the continent's GDP and half of the continent's population. Countries like Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Tanzania, that's where we're seeing most of the activity. As the slide on the far right shows, the listings is where we have most of the PropTech development activity. You see that most PropTech markets in any country usually start off with listing platforms. So listing platforms like Jumia House, Property Pro in Nigeria, this is usually the beginning of the PropTech space in most of the African countries that we're seeing. And countries that are further on or slightly earlier in the curve, rather like Cote d'Ivoire, we're seeing that their PropTech space in the form of listings is only just starting to develop. So we should start seeing some more activity in more property management, SaaS spaces as we progress through the years. So some of the other facts that we got when we analyzed this data, we actually got this data through some of the applicants that applied for the PropTech competition with API, that the average revenue that we're seeing across the continent for most of the PropTech companies is about $170,000. Total revenue for all the companies in 2022 or the last 12 months is about $10 million. So if we're looking at that, it's still pretty small. So there's still quite a lot of work to be done. The markets do differ, as I just mentioned. When you look at Nigeria, even though the number of startups is quite significant, the revenue is not as significant, rather. We're seeing about 50,000 is the average revenue per startup company that we tracked through this data. However, in Egypt, where we have really big established startups that have a really nice market and can also tap into what's going on in the Middle East, the amount of money they have or the revenue they're seeing is closer to $1.8 to $2 million. In South Africa, we're looking at about 200K, and in Kenya, it's about 16K. So these are indicators of the scale of these markets and what exactly is happening. The popular sectors and categories that these startups also fall into are an indication of the types of problems that we're seeing in each of them. In Nigeria, the real estate companies that are working within the financial space are the ones that are dominating the PropTech industry. So when we look at companies like Split and Small who have recently raised some funding, we're seeing that they are using their technology tools to help solve some of the nascent problems or the inherent problems in Nigeria. One good example is the fact that you have to pay rent upfront for a whole year in Nigeria. So a lot of startups trying to make property more accessible are working with landlords and using tech to allow young people pay instantly, or pay monthly to access property. In Egypt, listings and property management are also the biggest spaces. Those are some of the companies that are raising the most money. In North Africa, aside from, or rather within Egypt, I mentioned Nawi, who raised about $5 million, and Mubawab, I believe, in Morocco, they raised about $7 million in 2020. So in that space, they're doing quite a lot more activity. Within South Africa, the market is advanced from a real estate perspective, mainly because there are quite a lot of advanced real estate market players. You look at the stage and the volume of REITs or the number of property companies that are investing in real estate, it's a good indication of how property companies or PropTech companies who want to come into the space to solve problems have to work. So what we've seen is that the most popular PropTech category in South Africa is companies that are working within the software space or that are working within just general software. And in Kenya, listings, because it's still relatively early and their revenue is just about 16 grand is what we're seeing. So I think what we're talking about is how can we make this applicable to all of you? What does this mean for you? And then we had some really interesting questions from the last panel. But I think the three things that we need to be doing is, one, evaluating the use cases within your business, finding people to collaborate with, and then identifying how you can participate. Now, I'll take these individually and help you break it down. But I think evaluating pretty much starts with general research. So the first thing that we should be doing is having a look around and just understanding what the PropTech landscape is like, understanding what problems people are currently solving, understanding the companies that have been developed, that have failed, and the ones that are succeeding. So as a corporate, as a business, I think it's really important that we educate ourselves about what these companies are currently doing. Another really good thing that you should be doing is that it should not really be an executive approach. It shouldn't just be coming from the C-level. It shouldn't be coming from the decision makers alone. It needs to be really wide and involve as many people in the company, everybody if possible, because if you're trying to use technology to solve property problems, the people from the bottom all the way up have access and see these types of problems on a daily basis. So involving everybody to educate yourself about what companies are out there and speaking to your entire team to help would be really useful. I think the next step would be to just conduct some type of audit, which would involve identifying pain points in your business or looking at just lengthy processes. So when you can find the pain points and identify lengthy processes, it's really easy to then see, okay, this is where technology could actually help, or this is where I think we could explore some type of solution internally or through external collaboration. The next would be to collaborate. Sandboxes are a really popular thing that we find in the fintech space. And it just involves really big financial institutions or even governmental institutions opening up their APIs and opening up their technology to allow anybody to collaborate and solve problems or build products. With real estate, of course, it's not just software. If you're building a real estate tech product or a PropTech product, what you're actually doing is engaging with a physical asset. So what that should involve is allowing, especially if you're a REIT, if you have a bunch of properties, 10, 15, 20, hundreds of properties, allowing property management companies, for example, who are building solutions to help increase energy efficiency or manage visitors coming in, anything at all, allowing people, creating a sandbox to allow them to build solutions to solve your problems is really the first step that we've identified that you should be doing when you're looking to collaborate. This is really important, speaking from a founder's perspective as well, because when you're building a business, especially a PropTech business, what you want to be able to do is meet the clients or build a product, and that's usually done internally with your team, but you really need to go out there to validate. You need to go out there to speak to customers, understand if your solution is actually solving a problem, and you can get the feedback that you need to improve the product. So creating a sandbox is what I would really advise if you're looking to go to the next step and collaborate. The next step would be, of course, to just take some action, either bringing in a PropTech company that you can work with, or partnering with a PropTech company, or deciding to build an internal team. That's what the previous panel was discussing, and I think instead of really trying to debate which one works, because you find that a lot of big corporates, instead of working with PropTech companies that are already solving some of those problems, they decide to build their internal teams. I think the best thing to do is just to take a decision, and you can usually learn and proceed as you move along. If you do believe there's no value that PropTech can give at any certain point, I think the best thing for you to do is to just hold on or shelve it, but ideally you should be identifying a time for you to revisit it, because the market is changing. PropTech solutions are coming onto the market on a daily basis, pretty much, and I think it evolves, so it would be good for you to revisit and make a new decision. Finally, participating, I think that just really means investing or being an advocate. It's really easy to invest in PropTech companies, joining syndicates, investing in accelerators, or doing angel investing. There are really good networks that are available that are scouting and doing some refining when you're selecting, to help you select PropTech companies to potentially invest in. Advocacy is also something that I would say, even if you're not investing or you don't want to participate, I think speaking up, in Nigeria we say sorosoke, that's not clear there, but it just means to speak up. Speak up and help people. Just if you're hearing, I spoke about this solution, somebody mentioned that there's a PropTech solution in property management and listings, speaking up and being an ally, I think is particularly important. So after you have, like I mentioned, evaluated your business, you can identify ways for you to collaborate and bring some of the PropTech solutions into it. And then you can figure out how else you can participate. So those are the main ways I believe the corporates and I think everybody in this room can figure out how they can be a part of the PropTech space. Finally, just a bit about myself and Estate Intel. Essentially what we do is provide market data and more specifically market intelligence for multiple cities across the continent. We take a very city approach when we're collecting data, insights, and intel because the real estate market is really about cities, not countries. So we're tracking things like market sizes, yields, vacancy rates, rentals in multiple African cities like Casablanca, Lagos, Abuja, Accra, Nairobi, and soon to be Abidjan, and cities in Zambia as well. Some recent milestones for us, because we are a PropTech company, we got into MetaProp, which is the most prolific real estate accelerator. They're based out of New York, and that was in September last year. We closed a 500K pre-seed in January that we just announced this month, and we also just became a part of the Google for Startups program, which is running from August up until I think the end of the year of February. So yeah, I think that's a brief overview. And then finally, one of the ways that we've been able to play with the data is using APIs. So those APIs can value property, we can take construction costs, and help people understand the PropTech and the property industry on the continent. Yeah, thank you.